Other two, he wears every day, even as part of his work, because part of the valet did not have a uniform. So he wears it as part of the work, or when he leaves work and he changes work, he becomes, with his new money that he gained from Mr. Rothschild and from the clothes he sold off Mr. Rothschild, he opened his own shop and he became a teller. He became a teller, and he wears all the outfits Mr. Rothschild gave him on a career of 5 years. He gave him 3 outfits a year. Every time out of those 3 outfits, 2 were informal. So every time he wears those 2 informal, he also gave half of them away. He sold them, gave them to other family members. All those outfits are going to be worn a lot. What happens after 10, 20, 30 years, 50 years grand max? All those casual outfits, including the light tan one with stripes and the medium brown one with checks, are all dead. The cloth is dead. What do they do? The people they pass on to, they are barely upper middle class, are probably middle class, max, or working class. They do not see the historical value they have, lack of money. What do? They start taking it apart to fix a blanket, to fix a petticoat, to use the outside, to reuse the interlining for a new coat, and the lining is completely dead. They use it as rags, and the outside cloth of the wool, they use it they use the surviving pieces to make a smaller coat for their teenage boy son. Then we are talking 1910. So by 1910, those garments have not survived except the special occasion ones. So those special occasion ones have eventually survived, and voila, to today. But Mr. Rothschild, you may tell me, some of them, almost every one of them, did not give even every single one of their casual outfits because they got attached to some. They had so many of them. They got attached to some of them, even the very casual ones, that they kept some of them. And then because the initial one it had been made for, let us say Mr. Rothschild of 1850, he was attached to it. When he dies, his son thinks, wow, I always saw father wearing down the weekend, and then when it got worn out, and it got worn out after 10 years because he had so many outfits, so it took 10 years to wear out, or even maybe 20 years because he had so many outfits. So when he died in 1870, let us say that Mr. Rothschild of 1850 dies in 1900. His son saw him wearing that outfit regularly, a few times a year, for 20 years. Then the outfit was too worn, at least for so high a member of society, to still wear. But when he dies in 1900, his son looks at the belongings and he finds that outfit. He finds those few outfits that he really loved. And he thinks, right, he kept them, although he had stopped wearing them 30 years ago. It was the last time I saw him wearing it. So I would keep it, because it means it meant a lot for him. So I would keep it. I would not give it to servants. And especially, he wore it in it white. So it is not a very nice gift for a servant when you are a multi-billionaire. You might give something new and quality and also less old-fashioned. So the grandson keeps it. Suddenly, the grandson dies 20 years later. Not the grandson, sorry, the son. The grandson, he comes in 1920. Again, he goes to the bedroom of that used to be the bedroom of his grandfather, had become the bedroom of his father. It would now become his bedroom. He checks, he sees these old outfits from the 1850s. He thinks, oh, well, that's really old now. And if it was kept for so long, then I would keep it. And so on and so forth. But they keep it within the wealthiest part of the family. Because they are the wealthiest part of the family, why ever should it end up sold upon eBay or Bazaar or Etsy or whatever? They never sell it. Nobody even knows it exists except a few Rothschild family members. And in some instances, they might see the historical value. They might suddenly, if they have more avant-gardist moral conceptions, they might think, you know what, I'm the richest man now. I have all this wardrobe that dates back to 200 years ago, historical pieces. What happens, you know what, I am now one of the richest men in Europe, but I could easily lose my money. At least in a museum, it is a state thing, it is more protected. So I would give it to a museum, but a lot of them don't even think like that, and then it ends up in a museum, and these are the pieces you actually see in museums. And so that is the reason for which most casual ensembles have not survived. Most things you actually find on sale, they have survived but are in museums or in rich families. Most things one finds on sale are not the casual. Actually, time out. Right now, I have switched, I have posted these 2 latest videos and the one I'm making now as part of a new playlist called If You Want Basically to Wear. Well, it's okay. Never mind what I said. Okay, time out is over. So So many things to explain to random people who know nothing, and even those who know probably know less than I. So I've thought a lot about that. To reach to those filters, I'm making those filters myself. I'm sure to have right and correct, because I was pondering a long time why only certain things are available when so many other things were available then. In terms of the upper class, the true upper class, let us take Britain. This is a real example. Britain back then, until 1920, was the richest country that had ever been. It was then the richest country on earth, the richest of anything, of Europe or whatever, in terms of the raw global wealth, and the most powerful. The country thus with the highest middle class, biggest number also in percent of the population, not in numbers, in percent of the population to have the biggest middle class and biggest upper class and lowest working class. Or in other words, what you would now call lower class. They had nothing such as a lower class, because back then the working class, unlike today in England or Europe, the working class actually worked and were the majority of people, and thus they were necessary and they were not considered low. The super poor people that were practically naked, you see represented in, for example, Scrooge, they were still part of the working class. They were and they were actually not known as the lower class, because the lower class was working class, they were still necessary, and the majority normal people. So, what they meant by undesirable, they meant people that were either too mental or too poor to still work, and they were the unfortunate few, the lowest of the lower class, which was actually not known as lower class, but working class. And those people were not known as lower class, those very poor tramps, whatever. They were actually known as undesirable. And some of them might have been multimillionaires, a beggar for all you know, and to turn mental, and they wanted to be a tramp and whatever, or to turn into drugs. But in terms of class, there were just three classes in the world, at least in the Western world, and other parts of the world too, like Turkey and whatever, Ottoman Empire. Upper class, middle class, working class. In today's world, since about the 1950s, the middle class is the vast majority. Back then, anywhere in the world was the working class. Britain had the lowest percent of working class, and 85% by 1900. And by 1900, there had never been a country with so low or working class. So it was Britain with the lowest working class. By 1890, it would have been higher. But even by 1900, 85% of the entire British population, it was lower if you only take the English population, but of the entire British population, thereof meaning Northern Ireland, whole of Scotland, whole of Wales, and whole of England, 85% were working class. Sherlock Holmes would belong to the middle class. Upper middle class, which was almost a class of its own, because it was so different from the upper class and at the same time the middle class, that it, in a way, you can sort of count it as a fourth microscopic class, but never mind. So then 15% were 10% were middle class, without counting the upper middle class. If you count the upper middle class, it is precisely, I think, 17.5% middle class. So in other words, 2.5% of people are upper middle class. Sorry. And then if you count all of the upper class, max 2.5% of the population. And that does not count 2.5% of people like even Downton Abbey chap, what is his name? Lord Grantham. It counts people well other than him who are still upper class, that have less money, less power, less education, but are still considered upper class, are still more than upper middle. So, that was the spirit back then. 85% of the population are working class. They spend their work, they work way more, working class means they are not tradesmen, they actually work, usually with their hands. They already have the machines, but they usually work with their hands. They are poorly literated. By that time, by 1890, most of them can read, but not very well like me. They do not read much. They only read magazines and dumb stuff. They work most of their days. They spend their lives in debts, literally. Debts. They do not own things usually. They do not own a property. They have to rent it. They are always in debts. I do not consider them poor. By modern European standards, they would be considered clearly poor. I do not consider them poor because they can still look rather respectable. They have enough to eat to more than survive, and so on and so forth. But